The self-limiting belief that I've had was one of the things that prevented me from getting to it quicker. So I would just leave it as simple as think bigger.
Welcome to the Wealth Strategy Secrets of the Ultra Wealthy podcast, where we help entrepreneurs like you exponentially build wealth through passive income to live a life of freedom and prosperity. Are you tired of paying too much in taxes, gambling your future on the stock market, and want to learn about hidden strategies for making your money work for you? And now your host, Dave Wolcott, serial entrepreneur and author of the best-selling book, The Holistic Wealth Strategy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Wealth Strategy Secrets of the Ultra Wealthy. Today's guest has an inspiring story that truly embodies the mindset of ownership, service, and financial independence. I'm joined by Gary McDermid, a former Navy officer turned entrepreneur, real estate investor, and cash flow engineer. Gary's journey is anything but traditional. He went from enlisting in the Navy straight out of high school to creating a life of financial freedom through real estate, passive income, and strategic business acquisitions. What's most impressive is how Gary applies engineering precision to wealth building, systematically replacing active income with cash flowing assets while leveraging tax planning and acquisition strategies to scale. In this episode, we unpack how a simple piece of advice in the military launched his real estate journey, his transition from nuclear engineer to full-time investor and business owner, how he's now acquiring tax and accounting firms to create scalable passive cash flow, the overlooked power of tax planning as a wealth multiplier, and finally, what it really means to engineer your financial freedom. Plus, we dig into Gary's new book, Set Your Own Goals or Someone Else Will, where he shares the mindset shifts and strategies that helped him take back control of his future. If you've been searching for a step-by-step way to get out of the rat race and create lasting wealth on your terms, you're going to love this conversation. And if you guys have been enjoying the show, please go ahead and subscribe to the show and share with a friend so that they can learn as well. Let's dive in. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's happy to be here. Glad we were able to connect today.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Always great to connect. And I think the audience is really going to enjoy your story. I mean, not only serving our country and the Navy, and so appreciate your service there as well as a fellow officer, but also, this path that you've taken to, creating passive income, to creating financial freedom. And I think it's a really inspiring path that everyone's going to want to learn from today. So, why don't we kick things off there and just, kind of talk about your career and your trajectory and how you even got into this whole space of, cash flow engineering and passive income.
Sure, absolutely. So it's kind of a roundabout way, as like probably most people will relate to. So a lot of times you end up doing something that you never thought you would. And that's, I guess, been my trajectory, right? As the military you mentioned, that is kind of the defining genesis of my career. At 17, I was a senior in high school and outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And my father woke me up. It was January that senior year, right around the time when you're getting ready to apply for colleges, which that was, of course, as you can imagine, the dream that I had. And when he told me that January that, son, I got some good news and some bad news. And the bad news was that there's no money for college. But the good news is I have a plan, get in the car. And we drove to the recruiting station right there on Georgia Avenue, the border of Washington, D.C. and Silver Spring, Maryland. And he basically, my mom didn't even want to leave the car, but we go there, he opens the door and he goes, you got Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Take your pick. I recommend Navy so you can see the world. And so I could say that the rest is history, but that was my foray into sort of the career. It's not necessarily the best way to get started on passive income or entrepreneurship. But thankfully, after boot camp, I was in an A school class, and somebody, a master chief, gave the advice to the whole class. They always, when you're young, you're 18, and you're in a group of class. There's always the one thing about the military is mentorship and camaraderie. And a master chief was telling the whole class, buy real estate everywhere you get stationed, and you'll make more money than the Navy will ever pay you. So that little nugget, as little as it sounds, as young as I was really the nugget that got me to do everything. And I could give you the short story or the long story. Didn't know
Yeah,
how much
no,
time
tell
we
it.
had.
So actually, how did you transition then from enlisted and then becoming a submariner, right? How did you get into, how did you make that transition?
Yeah, so that was that's actually I guess it's a little detail that I've somehow tried to forget. But one of the challenges with being forced to join the Navy out of high school and actually taking a pay cut, because I actually had a pretty decent. I was getting promoted quite a bit at the local diner, and I worked my way up to be the assistant manager. I was already opening and closing, and putting quite a bit of effort. And then this happened. So one of the things, the way that I joined the Navy was, the plan was is for that I mentioned I go into the recruiting office, and then we enlisted. But I also at the same time applied for a ROTC scholarship, because that would have been, you go to college and you get the commission. So it just so happened that one of those is instant gratification, so to speak, and the other one is delayed gratification. So when I went into the recruiting station, I signed all the paperwork to enlist. I think they called it the delayed entry program. And then I also applied for a ROTC scholarship sometime within that couple of days. I found out I got the ROTC scholarship, right before I right before I shipped off to boot camp. And the recruiters basically pulled me in. They somehow talked me into turning it down, because they said, why would you, we've been in, the recruiters basically said, we've been in the military for a long time, and most of the officers that were prior enlisted were the ones that we really respected. They were that's what you want. So if you got the ROTC scholarship now, why wouldn't you just go get some enlisted experience? And then if they gave it to you once, wouldn't they just give it to you again? So they kind of convinced me that it was the best career move to turn down the ROTC scholarship and enlist. And so that was what really, you asked, how did I make the transition? Really, I, for a moment in time, probably felt like, after I figured out what was going on, when I was, staying up late on the night shift cleaning classrooms for some of the officers that I would have been if I had done the ROTC scholarship. It was a little bit of a curveball that I thought, well, maybe I should try to see if I could apply, and then let the recruiter set. So that was from the moment that I enlisted. I knew that I wanted to get to become an officer and get that commission. The way that I went about it was a little bit counterintuitive, because I turned it down, got the enlisted experience, did about 2 years, tried to apply, actually got turned down. So I was a little bit surprised. I remember checking that list probably about 50 times that night that it came out, looking for my name, like there must be something wrong. But I got it the next year. Then about 3 years, and I did my commissioning program, Seaman Admiral program. I was the second class in that. I got the degree, was able to get the commission, and then I completed that checklist. Then nuclear power program. Actually went aircraft carriers, not submariner. That was a little bit tough, but I did complete the engineering. And all this whole time, I was saving my money so that I could follow what that master chief told me right out of A school. Bought the first house at 21, and then tried to do it at every other duty station.
Okay, awesome. So that was really your first tip into real estate, is taking that piece of advice. And, folks, stay with us here. Gary's got an amazing trajectory of, where he's been to what he's actually done now, which is really interesting. But I want to kind of walk through this sequentially and everything, because I think it's important to grasp, maybe some of the learning lessons you've had, some of those transitions and kind of pivotal moments and things. So that was your really foray into real estate. So you started get going with real estate. And then how did that really kind of, evolve into, what did you do with real estate? How did you learn about, passive income, financial engineering, and then coming to, today to buying different tax practices and, what you're doing today?
Right. So that, it's an evolution. I'm a very cautious person. Most engineers are, right? So we're not necessarily risk takers. My father was actually a CPA, and he was probably one of the most conservative folks that I've ever met. So for me to even just follow the trajectory, it took quite a bit of time. But the one thing that I did, the one thing that I realized with even the first couple of rental properties is that it is passive income. So for the most part, you get income without having to trade the time for the money. And that was always one of the biggest concerns is as a technical person, even after I got out of the military, or if you're in the military and something happens to you, right? Like what is your ability to be able to reproduce that income? And the more that I had some of those thoughts, and I went into, I didn't know how to get a career out of the military, but thankfully there's groups that target prior nuclear field officers, and these headhunters, they would just line you up with all these interviews. But it's not to say that, I've interviewed for an agricultural company, a pump manufacturing company, and then another. I just took what I knew. So I was consulting for nuclear power plants. It was almost the same lifestyle. The nuclear power field is one of the most demanding, inflexible fields. You have to be perfect because there's no room for error when you're dealing with nuclear power, nuclear anything. And so that type of a lifestyle, whether it's high speed in the military or high speed doing consulting, there's a chance of burnout. And so then you always wonder, well, what do you do if something happens? And I didn't really have a good answer. What I did know is that I had a rental property, and then I had a couple rental properties, and they provided passive income. So that to me seemed like the safest sort of insurance policy and the knowledge that I had. So I started transitioning to that, even 1031 exchanging. When I did study from somebody that actually perfected a model, and I just implemented it. So just like in the military or a franchise, when you get an infrastructure, you get a business in a box, or you get some type of model, and then you just replicate the model and then do it well. Same thing as following orders, but you're following some type of structured plan. So with this, I learned how to help a family that wants to own their own home, but currently can't because of credit or other reasons. We provide that opportunity of home ownership, and then it becomes a win-win. So you get passive income, you help a family, and that was basically the model that kind of propelled to making the transition to generating the passive income, increasing the portfolio, and then eventually replacing the active income. So that's kind of the trajectory. And then after doing nuclear design and nuclear consulting, that there's a certain amount of there's some challenge. The buying real estate that is single family residence is a little bit simple after a certain point. And some of the stuff that you do as an engineer is very complex. Like, can you start this auxiliary feed pump when you don't have the priming pump? And can you bet the engineering plan on that? And you have to do an analysis. That's hard. That's very complex, and it's challenging. So when you do the real estate and it gets a little simple, sometimes you're left with a little bit more. And that was really why I ended up doing the angel investing or investing in companies, was because there's a certain amount of complexity that I kind of had the itch for. And when you look at a company and decide whether or not you're going to invest in it, that is another level of complexity and challenge. And that was the next step in my journey. Was now that we've got the passive income and it's stable, I wanted to keep doing more. And eventually, what I realized was buying businesses the same way that you buy real estate, and including in your portfolio, if the portfolio is based on passive income producing assets and you buy a company, and to the extent that you don't have to be active. I mean, the first one I was very active, and then you start doing that. But over time, you can generate the same type of passive income and generate wealth a little bit quicker with the business because of the way that the businesses are valued, and multiples happen as you aggregate more businesses that are similar with the same infrastructure.
Yeah. So how are you able to bifurcate really making as a purchaser of a business making that passive versus active, because I know anytime any business I've ever been involved with, touched or anything, I'm always ready to kind of roll up my sleeves.
Right, and that is in my trajectory, right? That is still sort of continuously evolving, and what it boils down to is now that I've done a few of these, and on the next ones, what I've learned is that the acquisition criteria is everything. So if you set the acquisition criteria and you're buying a business that has a certain amount of revenue and a certain amount of employees and a certain amount of profit margin, then if you do it with the design or the end in sight that you do not want to be active in the business, then set the acquisition criteria such that you will have the result of not having to be active, and then you could be working on the business instead of in the business. And so a lot of times it's like, well, when you're learning this, the business that already has the higher revenue and the higher profitability is certainly a lot more expensive. So then how do you structure and how do you get the financing? That was kind of the missing piece. And over time, I started understanding how to acquire and then put those together. But that's a whole nother, it's something I've always been a continuous learner. And it's something that I'm still continuing to perfect and get to that next level.
Huh. Yeah, that's cool. So what does your portfolio look like today, Gary?
Yeah, so right now we've got quite a few single family homes under the program that I described. We're in two major markets. Two major markets, two states, and several investors. That's going pretty well. Have a property management company that manages all those interests. And then lately I've been buying tax and accounting companies and offering higher level advisory, so tax planning. Our average client that last year we saved $44,000 in tax with per client on that business. So it's just one of those things. Especially now, accountants are in quite a bit of demand, and if you have a good service or you acquire that type of business, and then you offer tax advisory, which is not typically offered in most tax preparation or accounting firms, now you're able to take a business that's already got a good clientele, it's got good profit margin, and then you're adding a service that's well needed and not currently offered to that client base. So those two things in and of itself are ways that you could continue to buy an asset that produces income and then has the ability to increase that revenue in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you been taking a lot of the things that you've learned on the real estate side with taxes and kind of doing financial engineering and trying to bring that to, these tax firms?
Yeah, and that's just kind of one of the benefits. If you just look at saving tax, but you also look at generating wealth, which is what most folks want to do. They want to save money on taxes and invest the savings into something that produces more income or wealth. And so real estate, as we've discussed, is a very good way to do that. So how do people get into real estate? Everybody has different levels of it. And then to the extent that we're able to save on tax, and then we're also able to look at real estate. We have an experience. My business partners in the tax businesses are also real estate investors and have been doing real estate for a significant amount of time. We can explain some of the complexities of a real estate professional status, losses due to depreciation, cost segregation, accelerated depreciation, and then using some of that strategically. All of those things go hand in hand. And so it actually positions us fairly well to get somebody that can benefit from the tax savings and is looking to reinvest that. There's a lot of conversations and advice and just general counsel that can be had. So it really creates a win-win and a nice little ecosystem.
Yeah. I think you really hit the nail on the head. And people, I always tell people it's like the biggest opportunity they have that's right in front of them, because most people are always just thinking about investing by, what is the yield? What is the asset class? What is that shiny object that we're going after? But if you really step back and look at it, if you could reduce your number one biggest cost, and that's even in your business or in your personal financial statement, it's taxes, bar none. So a 10% savings, a 15, 20, 30% savings, that's massive. And if, like you say, if you can, redeploy, all right, that difference into an asset, an investment vehicle, I mean, those are some significant returns, right? And with proper planning, that's actually compounding. You put a good tax plan in place. It's not just a one-time shot, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's just, it's always, I always look at it as creating that win-win. And if we can create the win on the tax savings, the win on the investment, or just any of those things that help folks accomplish their goals, that is a recipe for increasing the success of everybody involved.
Yeah. Any top, tax strategies that you could mention on the planning side before, besides the kind of the popular ones we know of, like, real estate professional status and cost segregation, bonus depreciation, any other things that you like?
Yeah, a lot of so like what I always there's some ones that are specific that folks can benefit from, and there's some also ones that like business owners, right? So if you look at just how entities are structured, a lot of times the way that you structure your company, or the way that you change that structure over time as the company grows, there's tax efficient ways to do that. And when you look at exit planning, so something as simple as, without going on, because it is a pretty complex topic, but a lot of the clients that we have, or a lot of the customers, when they come in, they might have the one entity, or they might have several entities, and they really only need the one or two. So it's always a mix. And so when you optimize the entity structuring, so just as simple as if you take a real estate investors, they might be doing flips. They might have short-term income, which is taxed as ordinary income. They might have passive income through rental properties or notes. So all of those things, passive income, like if you just look at how you structure that, you want the passive income to be taxed as a partnership because there's no self-employment tax, and you want active income to be taxed. Ideally, an S corporation would, depending upon your income level, an S corporation, if you tax the active income to that, then there's an extent that you can reduce some of that self-employment tax. So how do you, knowing that a lot of these investors have all these different types of income, how do you work on that structure so that you can quickly and efficiently segregate the type of income? That's just some of the stuff that we're able to do. And then you combine that with asset protection and estate planning. And, we definitely involve some attorneys for some of those things, but just having that understanding, being able to walk somebody through that as they start, as they grow, as they increase their properties and entities, we can do that in a very tax efficient manner, sets them up for long-term estate planning and also for risk mitigation or asset protection. So that's one strategy. And then for personal, there's some folks that, maybe they donate quite a bit of money to charity every year. There's some other vehicles that we can use where maybe you can set up a vehicle where they could make that same amount of donation that they were going to make anyway, that they normally make personally, but it's in now a vehicle that they basically can acquire more property with, investment property. Now the money that they were going to write for charity comes out of this vehicle, and then they get an upfront significant tax deduction for that first year, and then after a period of time they get all of those assets back. So there's certain things like that. That's just a little bit of a mix for a business owner or an individual that comes to us. There's so many different ways, and that's just a little snapshot of some of the things that we can do.
Hey, it's Dave Wolcott here. Let me ask you something. Are you tired of the same old financial advice that leaves you spinning your wheels? If you're ready to discover the real secrets the ultra wealthy use to build unstoppable wealth, then I've got something just for you. My new book, The Holistic Wealth Strategy, is your ticket to learning the proven strategies that the top 1% don't want you to know. This book isn't just about money. It's about building a life of purpose, freedom, and lasting impact. And I want to give you a free copy. Visit holisticwealthstrategy.com and get yours today. It's time to level up your financial game and create the future you deserve.
Yeah, no, some great strategies there for sure. What about actually conservation easements right now? Have you heard anything on those? I know they were kind of a little bit on the taboo list, or people kind of taking advantage of some of those. But any thoughts on that, on the latest?
Right. Actually, I think we traded a couple of emails right around the tax time on some of
Yeah,
those strategies. That one is that's a little bit more like you mentioned. It's a little bit more attention gathering.
yeah.
There's still ways that could be acceptable. It's not necessarily a strategy that we're actively pushing right now, although there are some variations of that don't necessarily have to be a conservation easement, but there are some variations that we could look at case by case. There's some other similar concepts with the oil and gas and some of the solar that could be done. And so these are more strategies that benefit somebody that's like a higher W-2 that can't creatively take advantage of some of the business deductions or some of the real estate deductions that we talked about. But there are some ways that if you dot the I's and the T's that you could do that. It's just not something that we've been really pushing.
Can you explain what it means to be the cash flow engineer and how that mindset really helps people build lasting wealth?
Yeah, so cash flow engineer is sort of it's hard if you do something for a while, you sort of identify, right? So that like when we're buying some tax firms from CPAs, that's the identity. So for myself personally, I've been an engineer for the majority of my professional career, and I do kind of identify. It's just what I found though is I may not be doing design or analysis for nuclear power plants now, but just the way that if I get a business owner and they want a tax plan or they want to get more passive income, it's the same skill set that I would use in designing a system or an improvement for a nuclear power plant. It's the same skill set that I would use it looking at the root cause. Okay, so if there's a problem, let's look at the root cause of that problem. Let's not just jump to a solution. Let's take the problem that we're trying to solve, break it down, look at the root cause, and then identify complementary solutions that fit. And so when you look at cash flow engineering, it's like everybody has things that they like or things that could benefit them. And yeah, everybody could be a real estate investor. Does that mean everybody should? Everybody can own a business. Does that mean they should? So how do you meet with somebody, break that all down, and then engineer something that works? And that's really what I look at cash flow. When I say cash flow engineering, it's that process to just break it down, look at something that fits that person and set it up.
Yeah, I really love that, Gary, and I can relate to that. I mean, I'm far from an engineer, that's for sure, but I love building systems. I love solving problems, and I think to me, when I started my journey, was actually the problem, right? The problem was, how can I stop trading my time for money? How can I create passive income? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like just came out at the time and they said, hey, you can invest in real estate. It's like, okay, well, that's one vehicle, but really, yeah, how can I engineer something, right, that's going to systematically, produce passive income for me? And what are the strategies to do that? And it's funny, right? Because to me, this is what I really think financial planning should really be. Right. But in reality, the way traditional financial planning is it's basically, they're helping you with some allocation mix of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, trading what those could be, right, and doing that all on a single platform. But this is truly financial engineering. It's cash flow engineering to determine how can you create cash flow, how can you mitigate your expenses, and everyone's scenario is a little bit different. Right. But there's certain, vehicles we can use, such as real estate, that can help us kind of maximize that solution to get there. But, sadly, not enough people really talk about them. Right. They're just, you can only learn about them from, books or podcasts or things like this.
Right. And that's just that's one of the things. It's like even just the concept of passive income. I've always thought when I learned about passive income, how important it's almost like water, right? It's one of the most important things that you should have for your total well-being. And it's one of the most almost unattainable if because you have to understand it, recognize it, and figure out how to get it. And it's just not, for some reason or another, it's not readily accessible or taught. And maybe there's a way that, like you mentioned, it's podcasts, but maybe there's a way that permeates and then it becomes more mainstream, because just a little tweak, maybe you find a way to save some money and buy a property every couple of years. Just having that mindset, understanding it and seeking it out is going to be far better.
Yeah. I mean, tell me what you think about this, Gary, right? Because, I really, as I kind of reflect on this and really think about it, right, I think that, 99% of investing is really all Wall Street driven, right? And a lot of that comes from, when you kind of peel back the layers, it's really because that's how the model works. It's based on assets under management, right? So they're only recommending solutions typically, right, that kind of support that model. But that model, when you look at it from a bigger picture, is really based on this accumulation theory. So that is that you subscribe to building up to this certain amount of, portfolio dollars that you will actually turn into passive income. They don't call it passive income. They say you're going to retire and take out 4% or even less than that nowadays. At age 65, you start taking out that income and then hope you don't outlive your money. But what we're really saying with passive income theory is that you're actually creating income today, however old you are, and then you're trying to build up that income so that if you lose a job, you have a medical issue, you transition, a career, or you do want to retire early or whatever that is, you have the control and the ability to do that rather than waiting till you're 65 to build up some nest egg that may or may not actually deliver.
Right. And that's, it's a little bit of a challenge. And if you just take that for what you just said, right, and you look at how a lot of the mainstream vehicles get paid, right? Like you mentioned, assets under management. So that model, there's some challenges where in up and down markets, the fees are still paid, right? So in the approach that we're talking about, like you have a lot more control over that, and you can set it up in a way that you can make income now. And so there's a lot of, maybe it's the more conventional or more mainstream way, but that's also a little bit scary. Like, just when I was looking at engineering the passive income for myself, it's like, I could put all this money in something traditional, but what if I don't have the control, or if it goes down, and then you're still taking the fees? We talked about how tax return, taxes are kind of like one of the largest expense that most folks have, but don't know what that amount is. I remember, because I've had some traditional stuff before under the conventional assets under management, and only after I learned what I know now, it's like, it's the same thing that we were saying with taxes. What are the fees in one of those conventional vehicles? It's actually a little bit harder to go take the statement. It might show that you made 30-something% last year, but how do you actually look at, like, what was the cost of that? Like, is there a fee? Was there also a fee taken when the money was placed? Was there a fee taken when the assets were under management? Was there a fee taken in some other way? And sometimes it's a little bit tough, just like finding out what the taxes are. What were the fees? So whether or not one model is right or the other, if you're engineering something for yourself, you can look at things like, do I want income right now? Do I want to ever accept negative cash flow? Do I care do I buy for appreciation, or do I buy for cash flow now? All of these different factors, or these different things that you want, just like you asked about buying businesses that you're not operating in, right? The same thing when we talk about this engineering the portfolio. What is it that you need to have? What is it that you want to have? And if you don't know what you need, because sometimes what you think you need isn't what you need, get some advice, and then get that criteria, and then just go out there, now that you have the design, and just go out there and execute. But that hopefully it's hard to say. I don't want to say something is right or wrong. It's just, there's something that's a fit for everybody, and we just have to figure out what that is.
Yeah, or it's the fact that you don't put all of your eggs in one basket, right, and hope that that's going to work. And I think this, track that we're going down, really talking about it from an engineering perspective, like is completely spot on. And as I was kind of going through my journey, right, this is how I created basically more informed decisions, right? Because I was the only one I could find, who was saying, let's invest in alternatives and real estate, because I was driving this. It was data driven, right? I was looking the results that I could see, and then I was modeling out and doing some analysis that nobody does or no one talks about, right? So again, like if you model out your passive income, right now, and if you start accruing, right, some real estate assets, some alternatives, right, that are tax efficient and things, and start modeling out what that tax flow or the cash flow is today and what that could be over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And then you compare that to any type of market scenario is essentially like a 7.5% return. I don't care what you're really invested in, but just look at it over time, plus you have taxes, fees, and inflation that erode that, right? So go with make some assumptions, plug in the data, right? And see what really makes sense for you. And then what chips do you want to place on, you don't necessarily need to put everything in real estate. I don't think that's not what we're saying, but similarly, why would you put everything into a liquid portfolio? Right, which has a lot of limitations to it. So I think investors are getting smarter about that. And actually, we're seeing a big shift. Even some of the institutions now are trying to get into alts and real estate. But you guys have to understand, right? If you get access to a REIT or an alternative that's on a publicly traded market, you're not getting the tax benefits. You're just investing as a retail investor. So you're getting exposure to that asset class, but really only from a yield perspective. We may not necessarily be getting the direct cash flow or those tax incentives that are so, powerful for us.
Right. So that's just the summary is diversifying, making sure that you're designing, have that criteria, the acquisition criteria, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's acquiring an investment, whether it's acquiring a company, having that design, looking at what's needed and then executing the play. That's essentially the what I've learned over this roundabout journey, having to start as the enlisting out of high school, figuring out passive income for the first time, and then just trying to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Gary, tell us about your book. I know you just launched a new book called Set Your Own Goals, or Someone Else Will. Tell us about the inspiration for that and what that's all about.
Yeah, so I actually did just release that in 2021. I did a talk on Amazon Prime Video on a TV show called Speak Up. I had my own episode where I did about a 15-minute just a talk, and the talk I did was Set Your Own Goals or Someone Else Will, and that was a little bit of the story that I kind of shared with you today. Is I basically, since high school, grew up following orders. I was following orders for Navy officers. I was following orders, and when I left, for corporate vice presidents, and I never really thought, because when you're at a young age, you join the military, and that's what you know. It's almost like you're a people pleaser. You get the job done. You get it well, but you do it well, but you get the job done. And it was only a little bit later on that I started to realize, like, what if I wanted to set my own goals? Is that something that I could do? Do I have to just keep following the military? They tell you what to do. You have the job. You just follow orders. Then when you get out, I didn't know how to get a job. The headhunters basically threw up a couple of things, and I took one of those. It took a little bit of time. I never thought, we talked about the entrepreneurial journey. I never thought I could do that. I kind of wanted to, but I never thought it was possible. So it took a serious amount of mindset shifting. And then when I put that talk together based upon, after having successfully started my own businesses and then started growing them, I did that talk, and then after that talk, it was filmed in front of a live studio audience. I had a couple of folks basically pull me aside in the audience afterwards and told me how it actually gave them something to think about and inspired them. And I was encouraged to just kind of, because just the little 15-minute talk that I did with 5 steps on how to set goals was not just something you could take and give, right? There's the mindset shifts that had to be made were just as powerful and necessary. And so that was what basically spurred the idea to turn it into a full-length book. And I take the 5 steps that I use to be able to do everything that you heard me talk about today, and then I just share the mindset shifts that I needed to make to be able to even take the advice of how to execute those goals and think big and basically overcome. In my case, it was self-limiting beliefs that I didn't think I could do any of these things. And so really, I just took all of that, was encouraged by the talk that I did on the TV show, turned it into a book, and that's basically brand new. It's setyourgoalsbook.com, and I've got that something to give back on this next trajectory of my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats on the book. And, it is interesting because if I think about, all of these things, right, these learning lessons we talk about and kind of conceptually, what we're trying to do by take this alternative path to Wall Street, a lot of it really is about taking back control, right? So you are in control, right? Rather than outsourcing. We work so hard to create our own financial wealth and what that is. So why just, take all of that and then just completely outsource that to somebody else and then be at the whim of kind of the gyrations of the market. Whereas, when you have real estate and some of these other assets, you can actually have more control in your portfolio, more say in actually what you're doing, and really have it aligned to your investor DNA and really what's important to you in life.
100%. That really is what it came down to, is just set your own goals, take control of your own destiny, whether it's your personal goals, whether it's your financial goals, whether it's your health, whether all of those different things, just having flip that switch and realizing that you can do it, and then knowing how to do it and how to think bigger and just get it done. That is really what we're talking about. And it's exciting to have that conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Gary, if you could give just one piece of advice to the listeners about how they could really accelerate their own wealth trajectory, what would it be?
The number one thing that I would just everything that when I look back, it might be easy to just say think bigger. And part of that, the first mindset shift that I had to make was a visualization technique. And it's the saying, you might have heard that, do you have to see it before you believe it, or do you have to believe it before you see it? And so the one point that I will just say is think big, like believe in it. Like if you can use visualization to believe in something bigger than you're already doing, then you will see it. And it's not that you have to, there's the self-limiting belief that I've had was one of the things that prevented me from getting to it quicker. So I would just leave it as simple as think bigger. And for the most part, like any coach, right? The coach's job is to get you to be a little bit better over time, and everybody can do that. So think a little bigger and just do a little bit more every day. And all of these goals that you never thought you could do will magically start happening.
Love it. Gary, really appreciate your time today and sharing your insights and your journey with us. If anyone would like to learn more and connect with you or reach out, you want to throw out the URL for your book again, what's the best place they can connect?
Yeah, so on the screen it shows my name, McDermid, MacDermid. So on all social media, Gary McDermid, and the book is setyourgoalsbook.com. and GaryMcDermid.com. Happy to reach out and have conversations just like this.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wealth Strategy Secrets. If you'd like to get a free copy of the book, go to holisticwealthstrategy.com. That's holisticwealthstrategy.com. If you'd like to learn more about upcoming opportunities at Pantheon, please visit pantheoninvest.com That's pantheoninvest.com.